My name is Jim Balloch. I was a reporter for the Knoxville News Sentinel in the period before and during the 1982 World's Fair, and for some time thereafter.
I'm John Underwood. I was Director of Internal Control for the World's Fair, in charge of security planning, and emergency medical services, and fire.
When did y'all first get involved with the fair? Because I don't know when you got on board and when you first started reporting on it.
I was reporting on it before it came into existence. I covered a lot of the debate and consternation and concern and support issues for the World's Fair. For there were a great many people in Knoxville were a little doubtful about whether we could have a successful fair or whether we even should try. There was concerns about traffic and the investment and things like that, but finally approved. And then as it became apparent that there was going to be a fair, there was a real controversy over housing for visitors to the fair, and a number of apartment owners of apartment complex were starting to evict people to make room so they could do housing for the World's Fair for visitors, and that created a lot of consternation. And of course, ironically, one of the things that helped grew support was a "we can do" spirit that was prompted by a story in the Wall Street Journal that said, suppose they gave a World's Fair and nobody came. And they referred to Knoxville as a scruffy little city on the banks of the Tennessee River. And that scruffy little city business kind of caught on. And eventually, all the forces in favor of the fair came together, and it happened.
Now, what about you, John? When did you first get involved with the fair, and how did your role evolve?
Well, I was with the police department, and I was selected by the chief to coordinate security, law enforcement, and security for the World's Fair in 1979. Bill Fox was the chief of police at that time, and he was a big planner, and he liked to get a head start, so he put together the planning committee, which I was in charge of at that time, and we put together a system to coordinate security, law enforcement, and private security for the World's Fair in '79.
At that point, are you still an employee of KPD, or?
I was still with the police department at that time.
So did you remain with KPD throughout the fair, or at some point were you?
I was with the police department until 1982, and I did the planning, bringing all the law enforcement agencies together, and then I did the planning until 1982, and was asked if I would take a leave of absence and come over to the World's Fair and do the security planning for the private security of it inside the fences. So.
Okay. And so then after that, you just go back to KPD, or that was the plan?
I was recruited out to Los Angeles with the Olympic Committee.
Another big event out in.
I did the Olympics out in Los Angeles.
What about that you think about just in general? What sort of jumps out at you about the fact that it has been 40 years?
Shock. Yeah, 40 years, it doesn't, some ways it does seem like 40 years, but in many ways it doesn't. And still got a lot of memories, but they're becoming a little more fragmented as time goes on, but a few things stick out in your mind.
Well, for you, what are some of the things that you do think of first?
Well, I think of a couple of things that happened before the fair, and one of the oddest things was that someone fired a high-powered rifle into the Sun Sphere as it was under construction. And nobody was hurt or anything when that issue. I guess John can address that because he looked into it as best he could. But I just thought that was an odd thing, and no one knows who did it or why, or if it was random or what. And I did not regard it as a portent of things to come. I just thought it was an odd happening.
So your recollection of that, is that something that workers or someone heard it, or was there already glass starting to be put in place? And I mean, how do they know that a high-powered rifle, if it's a construction site, I've seen it in all different phases, right, where, you know, if it's scaffolding, you probably would, and in the middle of the night, you wouldn't show up the next day and somebody shot something.
I believe John could address that question better than I could. I don't remember how it was determined.
Well, the glass was actually in place, and it was actually May 31st of '82 is when it was shot out, and it happened.
So it was during the fair.
It was. It was shot out. sometime after midnight, sometime after the fair had shut down. Yeah, the shot came from the west, off-site. So the jurisdiction for that, solving that case would have been with the Knoxville Police Department. So we turned it over to the Knoxville Police Department, and they, to my recollection, just from memory, they never did get that solved. But it did take out one of the gold-plated glasses on the sun sphere, and we got that repaired in short order, and it was never never solved.
What other things come to mind for you as far as trying to maintain security and doing all that stuff?
Well, we did the planning for just about every conceivable thing you could think of. We brought law enforcement in. We did like 1.5 million man-hours of training, law enforcement training with ATF, FBI, Secret Service, and part of the training was historically at World's Fair and large events, you would have people passing counterfeit currency. So we did training, and I believe it was like a month or 2 months before the fair opened. We did training with the Secret Service to identify counterfeit currency. And we brought our ticket people in, who's going to be taking the tickets, taking the money. Anybody handling money was trained in how to identify counterfeit currency. As a result of that, and we had 2 officers on each gate, so as a result of that, we captured a lot of the counterfeiters that was passing the money. And of course, when they got inside the World's Fair, they would pass a counterfeit bill to get inside the fair. And then part of the training was get the description of the people and understand what they were doing. And they were basically a captive audience at that time. They had to go out one of 4 gates. So we had all of the people around the World's Fair site trained in how to recognize these people. So,
but you do not have the person who is taking the money confront the person.
They didn't confront the person. It was only when they tried to get out that we confronted them, and the Secret Service was there. We had a command center set up, the Secret Service, the FBI, the ATF, all the federal agencies. So they would make the arrest. And it solved a lot of counterfeiting cases all over the United States with a considerable amount of money confiscated, counterfeit currency confiscated. So,
you know, the 1982 World's Fair was basically a big sting operation to catch counterfeiters around the country.
Well, it wasn't set up as a sting operation. It was set up as, if they're going to come in here and pass the counterfeit currency, we want to know who's doing it, and we want to be able to pass that person along to the appropriate federal jurisdiction. And it worked.
Let me ask you, because you mentioned that you also did the Olympics. Was there anything that specifically you dealt with during the Olympics that you said, yeah, man, this helped me that I already had done that with the World's Fair?
Yeah, a lot of the things that we did at the World's Fair was bled over into the Olympics, and crowd control, law enforcement coordination, and I mean, we did hostage negotiation training, and I mean, you name it, we did the training. So my guess is this was probably, Knoxville World's Fair was probably the best trained security staff in the history of World's Fair. And it shows when you look at the crime stats for 1982 and 81 and the such. We actually...
Sorry, I know we had a severe thunderstorm.
Yeah.
outside, but, you said we actually...
We actually reduced crime in Knoxville at that time. There was the theory that these pickpocketers were going to come in, and people were going to come in and pillage Knoxville and the World's Fair site. And to some degree, there was pickpockets, but we actually reduced the crime on every level across the board during the fair, or during 1982.
You two know each other during that time, or ever deal with each other?
Oh, yes.
Professionally?
Oh, yeah. I first met John when he was with the Knoxville Police Department, and he was working the jail. And I would go down, and when I was a police reporter, I'd go down daily and check the jail logbook to see who among the infamous and famous had been arrested that particular day. That's how we met, as I recall it anyway.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. We got to be good friends and knew we could trust one another. And
We were smart enough to understand that the negative publicity that the World's Fair was getting prior to the World's Fair could be adjudicated somewhat if you had the reporters getting out the facts. And Jim was basically getting the facts out. So we didn't use him. I let him. The friendship that we had and the bond that we had, it helped in the publicity.
no, let me state for the record, I was not on the public relations payroll for the World's Fair. And the World's Fair was a private organization, so the incident reports, I did not have to be provided to me. And John and I had an agreement. He would let me see the incident reports. And if there's anything I wanted to write about, he and I would discuss it. He never asked me not to write anything. So
For you, what are some of the stories that stand out, as opposed to the random gunshot in the middle of the night into
Well, for some reason I remember this. There was a first aid emergency station set up, I guess they think facing Clinch Avenue. And a police officer would come by there occasionally, and a firefighter would come by there occasionally, and it was also served as lost and found. And I can't remember the lady's name that was charged with lost and found, but one day this young girl came in and said she misplaced her purse and couldn't find it, and she'd like to check back and see if it was turned in. And the lady said, sure, and the girl left, and she came back and stuck her head in the door a couple of minutes later and said, if anybody turns it in, don't look inside it, okay? I can guess what it was inside the purse, but no, never knew for sure. But and then my fondest memories are the Australian pub, the Australian Pavilion. They had a pub, set up a pub. It was called, appropriately enough, the Down Under. And they had folk singers. They were twin brothers, I believe. There were two of them. I believe they were twins. And they would crack a bullwhip and sing Waltzing Matilda all night. And a good time was generally had by all. And their beer cans were a lot bigger than ours.
And I think that they, in general, Australians play a lot of music that's very similar, almost to a bluegrass and acoustic kind of I don't know what kind of music they were playing, but.
Yes.
They're big partiers.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. And wonderful people, I might add.
How long have each of you been in Knoxville before? I mean, I don't know if y'all are from here, born and raised here, or if y'all just, how long had y'all been here? What's your life before the fair?
I was born and raised in South Carolina. I came here to go attend the University of Tennessee. I was in and out a couple of times before I graduated, and I just decided to stay. Knoxville's a wonderful town. A wonderful town.
Well, and how long had you been a journalist or been here before the fair?
1972, I believe, was the year I was hired.
Okay, so I mean, you had already basically 8 to 10 years under your belt when that happened.
Yeah, the first couple of years I was here, I was working at the News Sentinel as a night police reporter while I finished college.
And what about you, sir?
I was born and raised in South Knox County out near Seymour. Came to work at the police department in 1973. So I'm from this area now. In 1983, after the World's Fair, I moved to Los Angeles to be with the Olympic Committee out there. So I spent 20-something years in Los Angeles as a result of that. So.
And where I'm going with that is to ask you guys if there's any way to explain to people who were not here before and after what the difference was in Knoxville by having this event.
Well, the big difference that I would say, first of all, was the streets and the highways and the things that Knoxville got out of the World's Fair. They built and added on to streets, and they cleaned up this the World's Fair site, which was just an old railroad yard, and it looked terrible. But after the World's Fair, we had streets we could drive on. I-640, as a result of the World's Fair, was built. Malfunction Junction went away after the World's Fair. Those are the big things that that really impacted Knoxville.
And what about you, Jim? What kind of stands out to you?
Well, there was a lot of commercial redevelopment that did not occur right away because interest rates were high and the economy was not good. But eventually, that fair has to be responsible for a lot of the good commercial redevelopment that came about.
And I've heard a lot of folks mention this, and I don't want to jump to a conclusion or put words in your mouth, but I have heard multiple people say, it wasn't like, all right, in 1983, downtown was jumping again. But there are people who feel like that got a ball rolling, and even just not having blighted property beside downtown, maybe eventually got to be a more palatable place for somebody to want to.
I think it goes back to what Jim was saying about the label that I believe it was the Wall Street Journal or one of the agencies put on it, the scruffy little city. But people took more pride in Knoxville at the time. After the World's Fair, during the World's Fair, I mean, they took ownership. This is our World's Fair, and it was a good thing from my perspective in the pride that they took.
And I've heard a lot of people mention that for all the bickering beforehand, when it was happening, that, man, people were proud to be from Knoxville where, they may have.
Well, there was a pride of accomplishment. We can do this. We went from being a scruffy little city in the eyes of some reporter somewhere to look what we did. And I think that was a big factor.
I remember a headline or maybe a button going around saying, "Scruffy little city did it."
Yeah.
Let's talk about that specific article because it is from the Wall Street Journal. It does say, what if you held a World's Fair and nobody came? And then they start talking about New York and Paris and all these other ones and then and Knoxville. What was your reaction when you read it? I mean, you worked in the news.
Well, I was a little bit personally offended, but also I'll admit I found it somewhat amusing as well. Not necessarily mutually exclusive emotions. I was kind of surprised at how quickly the city adopted it as a phrase of its own. We're the scruffy little city, and we're proud of it. And we don't give a what you think, and we're going to do this. I think in the end that was one of the best things that ever happened with that particular phrase being hung on us.
And that was pretty far along in the process. The fair was going to happen, but everything I've heard is that, but after that, if there were any naysayers, they shut up and everybody kind of got galvanized. But I don't know if that's what happened to you from your perspective.
Yeah, people are resistant to change. I mean, people are naturally resistant to change, and they saw this as a big change coming to their little town. And that was, once it took hold and once it was a success, then most people thought it was the right thing to do. That was after the fact, but it did boost morale of a lot of people here, and it helped improve the way they thought Knoxville should be.
But there are a lot of people who have, these days, who have never seen that.
Yeah.
They've never known Knoxville without World's Fair Park or without that event already taking place. I mean, what's something that you absolutely cannot leave out if you're going to tell somebody about if you were there?
This was a huge, huge accomplishment for the city of Knoxville. When you consider there was more attendance at Knoxville World's Fair than there was at Seattle. Seattle's a big city. We had more people visiting Knoxville than Seattle. And our crime rate went down. And at the time, people were saying, well, your crime's going to go up, the prostitution, all of these counterfeiting and all that's going to go up. Well, we figured out a way to mitigate some of that. And just like I was telling you about the counterfeit currency, we did, and we worked that. And there was a sense of accomplishment in doing that.
Let me touch on something John just said. We had, I think it was 10 or 11 million visits. 11 million. And one of the reasons that the World's Fair was a success was because Knoxville was within a 1 day's drive of about 2/3 of the nation's population, and that helped enormously. A lot of people just came in their cars, and but the exhibits they were all over the place. For instance, the exhibit from Peru had a lot of gold relics. The exhibit from Japan included a model of, they had it set up where you could experience what it was like to ride one of the bullet trains in Japan. I lived within walking distance of the fair, and being assigned to be there every day was like going around the world every day on foot, but not getting so tired. And my fondest memories are of the Australian pubs. I gotta go back to that. God bless the good old Down Under.
But by the way, you mentioned that you live nearby, because I think they had fireworks every night, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
A large fireworks display,
Yes,
huge, out over the river.
right. And
What would you compare it to? Like a 4th of July or a Doomsday kind of thing? That big, or just,
No, it was big. It was large. It was for a good 30 to 45 minutes. It went on, or maybe an hour. I don't remember. Jim, was it an hour?
I don't think it was an hour.
But it was a long display.
That's to have it every night.
Yeah, and a perfect place to have it out over the river.
Exactly.
So pretty much you could see it from all over the World's Fair site.
And the World's Fair had what at that time was the world's tallest Ferris wheel.
Yeah, that's right.
And you could really get a bird's eye view of things by riding that sucker.
And that's basically over where the parking deck is now beside Nealon Way.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm sure it is.
Well, I know that he liked to drink with Australians. What was is there something, man, I really like that.
I like the pavilion down there, the Tennessee pavilion, where you had the tent and you had nightly concerts. They brought people in. Big name stars that came in, and you could for me, you could go down and kind of let your hair down and watch one of the shows, and it was good after a long day. That was fun for me. But a lot of the exhibits were good, like the French pavilion and the Egyptian pavilion was good. They had all sorts of things.
Is there a concert you remember, a performer?
Well, probably Jerry Lee Lewis. I think he was here two times. He put on just an excellent show here. And Glenn Campbell was here, and Tennessee Ernie Ford, I think, was here, Loretta Lynn, and a lot of the country music stars were here.
And if you're in charge of security, how much are you having to coordinate with all these performers and celebrities?
Our security brought them in. They would come to the entrance gate, and then we'd have security go out and get them, and they'd bring them in, put them on stage, and when they'd leave. And most of them spent the night in Knoxville, before leaving. So.
You mentioned that the counterfeiting thing. Something that Pete Clausen mentioned, there was a lot of concern or intelligence and counterintelligence with the fact that people from foreign countries who were coming here and were relatively close to Oak Ridge.
Yeah. Well,
it's not like they're going to get through the gates over there, but nonetheless.
Part of our planning from '79 forward was to mitigate some of that, and we had intelligence personnel on our committee, and that was feeding the appropriate people that information. So if we learned of a terrorist incident or a potential terrorist incident, that was all played to us beforehand. And we had a command center, which was up on Western there in our building, and where we had all of our meetings. So we could whistle up Secret Service, ATF, FBI, whenever we needed them, they were there. As a matter of fact, we had one of the exhibits was stolen out of the French pavilion, and the FBI was quick to respond, and they found the exhibit down in, you remember where it was at, Jim? Where they found
I've forgotten all about that.
I think it was down in Atlanta, down in Georgia, and they had it returned within 3 or 4 weeks. It was back at the exhibit, taken by somebody doing construction on the exhibit. So but they were probably worth millions of dollars, but they got it back very quickly. So we didn't lose a lot of stuff. I think we had a safe that was stolen by somebody. We had a railroad that ran through the middle of the World's Fair site, and security personnel had to go out, open the gate every night the train came through, and open the gate on the other end where he left. Likewise, they would search the train before it came on site to make sure there wasn't people on it, and other than the engineer and the people who were supposed to be on it. So that presented a security issue to us. So if you wanted to get on the World's Fair site, you could potentially hop a train, so we had to do our searches for that. So the intelligence apparatus that we had in place paid us dividends. And a lot of people didn't know that. A lot of people didn't know what we were doing behind the scenes, but we were being fed information along those lines.
So what's the biggest challenge at that site, other than the fact that you can hop a train and that there were 11 million people over a few months?
I think the biggest challenge was some kind of some organization using it as a terrorist incident to make a statement around the world. It was a huge, massive news event. It would have been a big news event, so we had to keep our hands on that.
Did you ever catch wind, or are you aware of this was thwarted, or there were plans, or this has been intercepted and somebody else either knocked it out beforehand?
No, a lot of that we can't talk about, but
even after 40 years?
After 40 years, yeah. But I'm sure we prevented a lot. But you got to remember, we had 2 security officers on each gate, and they were trained, professionally trained in what to look for and how to look for. So it would have been difficult, but that's not to say they couldn't have done it.
But now they were not crowd control. Those were security folks, and then you had separate crowd control.
No, they were trained in crowd control.
Okay.
Yeah, they were trained in crowd control and security tactics, and they went through a lot of training. A lot of good kids, a lot of good people we hired, and they're still around Knoxville. Some of them I hear from them occasionally, but they're really, really good people. I attribute the success that we had in the World's Fair site and keeping the incidents down and keeping crime down. I attribute that to them. They were excellent.
Jim, is there anything that I have not asked you, or anything you feel like, hey, people might not know this. This might be interesting.
Not exactly what you're asking, but I'd like the honor to mention, I was curious, we know how you train people to look for counterfeiters. How did you train people to look out for pickpockets?
Well, that's a good question, and it's not an easy task, but people that are around crowds of people, and we had a high density rate, more so than of people on site, more so than Seattle or Spokane had. So anytime you had a gathering of people around and you could see people come in that didn't fit, basically that's what you're looking for. People running, their hands in purses or pockets or whatever. We didn't have, on site, we didn't have a tremendous problem with that, but security would always get in the crowds and look for things like that.
Just be able to look out for unusual movement. That's what.
Unusual movement and unusual people.
Anything funny that you remember offhand? Something that's funny that comes to mind?
Funny?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well there's
Too many to remember.
Too
many.
But that's the one thing about memory, is whenever you ask someone 40 years later, you might be like later on, I didn't think that would be the first thing I would remember. But,
people wanted to do a lot of things at the World's Fair site. They get a once in a lifetime coming to the site, and a lot of those things they were doing were just kids having fun, and some of them were adults having fun, and you look over those because this is a once in a lifetime thing to come into a World's Fair site. But there's a lot of funny things associated with that.
And you're not going to, and I can't talk about any of them.
Well,
I mean, what about you, Jim? He's not spilling the beans. He's
Well, the only thing I can remember right now is the one I've already addressed about the little first aid and lost and found station, where the girl sticks her head back in the door and said, "Now, if somebody turns in my purse, don't look inside." that's for some reason that stuck with me all these years. There were other things, of course, but I just can't recall any right now.
There may be people who are watching this who weren't here. They may not even live in Knoxville. I mean, why do they care? Why should someone care that back in 1982, Knoxville, Tennessee had an event for a few months?
Well, I guess it just depends on your natural level of curiosity and interest. I can't really give a good reason, except that it impacted not just Knoxville, but it impacted the whole region positively. And today, we're in the middle of a gasoline shortage, and energy was the theme of that particular fair. Even back then, they were thinking about alternate energy. That may be a reason some people might be interested. John?
Well, people came to the World's Fair to have a good time.
Yes.
And we didn't want to get in their way. Security, I was always of the opinion that even though we're security, we shouldn't make it a security event. We had the high fences, which helped us with counterfeiters. We discussed that. But we didn't want to get in their way. If they're out having fun, hey, more power to them. Let them have fun, enjoy it, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime event for a lot of people. So, and most of the people that had the fun were kids, but you know, it was packed. This site was packed. We had, I don't know, 80-something thousand people on opening day, and then we had approximately 60,000 average per day. So if you look at Spokane had about 35,000 a day. So big difference in the number of people. So you had all kinds of people that were out there mingling, going into the exhibits and looking around. So it was a massive security undertaking.
You already mentioned the various celebrities, but I mean, you also had President Reagan, you had heads of state from the Philippines,
right.
Marcos, you know, I don't know.
I was actually,
how different is your job when something like that happens?
Well, it's different in the sense that you never want anything occurring on your watch. So I was with the Secret Service the day Reagan came. I had worked Reagan visits at the Knoxville Police Department, so I was aware of their dignitary protection. But the Secret Service, the President of the United States is like a gigantic gorilla in the sense that they pretty much go anywhere they want to go and do what they want to do, and they're surrounded by some of the best professional people that you could imagine. So they're in good hands, but they need gates open, they need crowd control, they need all the things that we can offer, that we could offer at the World's Fair, and that it worked very good.
I remember something odd. I won't call it odd. I don't know why this sticks out in my mind, but Imelda Marcos came to visit the World's Fair.
Yes, she did.
And I believe this was at the U.S. Pavilion. And her security guy was following around, and this was like in really hot weather, and he had a big overcoat draped over his one shoulder, no doubt to conceal a submachine gun. And I was thinking, well, you're not being too obvious there, buddy. But I didn't say anything to him about it, of course. But the way he had the coat and his eyes were always looking around. It just, I don't know, it just sticks out in my mind.
And that wasn't an issue from a security standpoint, because Imelda Marcos got executive protection from the federal government as well. So they knew what was going on. I mean, the Secret Service or the State Department, whoever was protecting her, they knew what was under the coat, and they could pretty much go, you know, where they needed to go. So,
one of the things that I liked to particularly visit the World's Fair site was a number of the exhibits included restaurants with cuisine from the particular nation or region. And the fact that I could walk from the office to the World's Fair or my home to the World's Fair and dine like that was, to me, just a very interesting experience. And meeting people from all over the world was an interesting experience too, not just the Australians. Them too, of course, we got along famously. Maybe there's an affinity between people from the South and the United States and people of Australia, but it was just very interesting to meet some of these different people. Yeah.
I think he's right. I think it expanded a lot of people's horizons. with regards to that.
One of the magazines has stated that for a city its size, Knoxville has an unusual number of high-end, very good restaurants, and World's Fair may well have been the big catalyst for that, or one of them anyway. I've not thought about that, but it's quite possible. Quite likely even. Quite likely even, John.
Anything I have not asked?
No, I think if I was just very proud of the way it turned out. I was very proud of the good people that we had in security and the good people that were taking the tickets and all around that we were able to train, and they knew what their job was and they looked forward to their job. Even though it was hot, handling people, handling crowds, it was tough, it went very well. And a lot of the people, we hired school teachers a lot that were out of school in the summer, and that paid us dividends. It was a train the trainers type thing. So we'd hire them, train them the way we'd want it, and they'd come in and train the other people. I took that philosophy to Los Angeles with me, and we did the same thing with the Olympics. That worked marvelous. I mean, it was good.
I mean, if you hire educators who are used to teaching in general. Then.
Exactly. I hired former UT football players and assistant coaches that worked security, and it went very well. But we were very selective in who we hired, and those kids, they did a good job.
Anything that we've either already talked about or that we haven't said that, hey, be sure to include this?
I think we've covered about everything, but just the lasting effects of the World's Fair and just how we were talking about just the culinary in this area, how it may have changed, how the highways changed, how the malfunction junction went away, and all of those things, we're still reaping today benefits to that. And you know, the World's Fair changes cultures. It helps change cultures, going from gravy and biscuits, and there's nothing wrong with gravy and biscuits, but there's a whole new world out there that people have an opportunity to see and be exposed to.
All right, Jim, anything that I can't leave out?
Let me share this with you for what it's worth. I was there on opening day, and I watched John open the gate, or order him open. I was standing on Henley Street, I think it was. I was looking down, and the fair was about 10 or 15 minutes late in opening.
We were late, yes.
And I'll let John explain why, the reason it was late, but it finally cleared up, and he had a walkie-talkie in his hand, and he was communicating with someone, and he said, fine. He had the walkie-talkie in his hand, spun it around like so, and said, okay, open it up, like that. And the world, and there was more to this story, and I'll let John tell the rest of it.
Well, we had some what Jim's talking about, we had some, unbeknownst to the fair goers, but we had some ticket agents that were late getting to the ticket booth. So crowds began to back up. And not just small crowds, I'm thinking maybe 5, 7, 8,000 people. Well, they were backing up to the main gate over here on Henley Street to the point that they were out in 2 lanes of traffic. So I didn't want to expose anybody over there to an accident off of Henley Street. Cars were still coming down, going through. So I made the decision at that time to open the gates and let them through. Now what Jim's talking about is I made the motion, hey, let them in. And they got a free pass. They got to see the World's Fair without paying a ticket. So, but to me, that would have...
So you did not buy tickets in advance and do that, you paid at the gate?
Some paid by the gate. You could buy tickets.
Anybody who was there, who was there ready to pay, got in free? I mean, and I'll have you...
At that particular time, they came in free. The gates were open, and we let the people in to get them off the street. And my theory was that's better than a car coming through there, careening through there, and injuring or killing some of our spectators. That would make a black eye for the World's Fair. Yeah. But it was kind of a command decision on my part to, let that happen.
Sure.
I remember something now. I don't know why this is coming back to me now, but outside the gate, there was a guy that was claiming to be Mr. First. His hobby was he self-published a book. He said, I was the first guy to enter this event, that event, and I'm going to be the first guy to enter this World's Fair. And a voice comes a little further down the aisle, no, you're not. And I looked around, it was another guy, and they got in this big argument who's going to be first. And I just said, I don't believe I'm going to write this story. Who could tell anyway? You know, I think I did write something about it and quoted both of them as claiming to be the first, but how could you really tell?
Have you gone back through any of your old articles
No,
from that thing?
I would like to have done so, but I didn't have time. I don't have a personal collection of them, and I'm sure the library, or maybe you guys have a bunch stack of them. And
I've had multiple people, be it Big Jim Haslam or whoever, talk about all of the political opponents who had to work together on this. You know, be it Jake Butcher and Haslam, and you know, you went from Carter and started with Ford and Carter and Reagan, and you know, Lamar comes in anyway. That just the amount of cooperation
And coordination, yeah.
among people who
where on earth?
didn't necessarily have to play nice.
Yeah, but,
Where on earth did all that go?
yeah.
We need that today a lot more than ever before.
Well, they were working toward a common goal.
Yeah, that's true. And it did benefit everybody.
Yeah.
There's plenty of credit to go around.
Yeah,
I guess that would make the difference.
yeah.
But I mean, that was something that Bo Roberts said really stood out to him was,
And Bo and his people kept the politics down to a dull roar. I mean, you know, check the egos at the door. I mean, they were absolutely fantastic to work with. And just like Pete Clausen, anytime you needed a legal opinion about something, he was always ready to help you. So we had a good bunch of people over here.